Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 71 of The Loud House, Middlemen. We begin this segment with Lynn entering the Loud House, and she smells cookies. Lola confirms that cookies are being made right now, but Lola makes a point to let Lynn know that these cookies aren't for the family. Lynn enters the kitchen, and she sees that Lincoln and Clyde are the ones making these cookies. Lynn throws the basketball that she's holding to distract Lincoln and Clyde so she can eat one of the cookies. Lincoln is not happy about Lynn pulling this trick, but Clyde thinks it's not a bad idea to have a taste tester for the cookies. Lynn confirms that she thinks the cookies taste great, and then she inquires the boys about why they're making these cookies in the first place. Lincoln and Clyde reveal that they have middle school orientation tomorrow, so some 8th graders are going to give the 5th graders of Royal Woods Elementary School a tour of Royal Woods Middle School so that the 5th graders will have a better idea of what they can expect during 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. Lincoln and Clyde also add that they wish to make good impressions with the students of Royal Woods Middle School. So these cookies are part of their preparations to make a good impression. Lincoln and Clyde also reveal that the other part of their preparations is to hand out Lincoln McLeod business cards. Lynn, however, is not impressed with these preparations, and Lynn thinks that these preparations will just make Lincoln and Clyde look like a bunch of weaklings that will be eaten alive, in her words. Lynn uses a jungle analogy to describe Royal Woods Middle School. Lynn then quickly assures Lincoln and Clyde that she's willing to help them out. So Lynn calls Royal Woods Middle School's principal, Principal Ramirez, and Lynn requests to become an orientation buddy. Clyde then whispers to Lincoln that he thinks it's a good idea for them to still keep the Lincoln McLeod business cards because Clyde thinks they might be useful during high school. The scene changes to the next day, and the 5th graders of Royal Woods Elementary School have arrived at Royal Woods Middle School. Lincoln and Clyde are both impressed by how much bigger the middle school is compared to the elementary school, and this leads to them saying that they consider it to be a good thing that they each brought a map of the middle school with them, because they fear the possibility of getting lost in the middle school because of how much bigger it is compared to the elementary school. From a distance, Lynn sees Lincoln and Clyde each pulling out a map, and she quickly rushes to Lincoln and Clyde. She throws the maps elsewhere and says that Lincoln and Clyde shouldn't use maps because her first piece of advice is that they shouldn't look or act like newcomers. Clyde, though, points out that he and Lincoln are newcomers. Lynn responds by saying that some upperclassmen consider newcomers to be ideal targets for pranks. Lynn then proceeds to tell Lincoln and Clyde about an incident from the past. Lynn mentions that during this incident, there was a kid who fell victim to the prank of upperclassmen during this kid's first day at Royal Woods Middle School. The upperclassmen gave this kid false directions, and the kid ended up lost throughout the middle school until the school day was over. We do get to see a brief flashback showing this incident, and the kid that Lynn is talking about is wearing a gray hoodie, and the hoodie, or the hood part of the hoodie, is pulled up, so we don't get a clear look at this kid's face at this point in time. After the flashback ends, Lincoln and Clyde each write down this advice on their respective notepads. A little while later, homeroom begins, and Lynn mentions that there are no assigned seats during homeroom, so Lynn says that her next piece of advice is that Lincoln and Clyde shouldn't get stuck with any poor desks. So Clyde finds a desk that he wants to sit at, but another student also wishes to sit at this particular desk. Clyde politely says that he's okay with this other student sitting at this particular desk, but Lynn doesn't agree with Clyde's method. So Lynn jumps in front of the of this other student and rather antagonistically yells at the other student that Clyde called dibs on this desk, or that's along the lines of what she says anyway. But after that happens, Clyde says that he thinks Lynn's methods were harsher than what was really called for. Lynn justifies her methods by bringing up another incident from the past. Lynn tells Lincoln and Clyde about how there was a kid who got stuck with the worst desk in the classroom. And this particular desk was so poorly constructed that the kid actually got stuck in this desk. So the middle school cook actually had to help the kid get out of the desk. That's how poorly constructed this desk was. We do see a brief flashback which shows this incident, and like the earlier flashback, the kid that Lynn is talking about in this flashback is the same kid that Lynn was talking about in the earlier flashback. This is the kid who was wearing the gray hoodie that's hiding their face. After the flashback ends, Lincoln and Clyde write down this advice on their respective notepads. So the scene changes to a later point in time. The scene changes to a later point in time. Lynn takes Lincoln and Clyde to a biology class. And Lincoln and Clyde put on some spare lab coats that are in this classroom, and the teacher of this classroom welcomes the fifth graders that are present for middle school orientation. The teacher also explains that they'll be doing something that relates to live worms, and the teacher instructs the students to each grab a case of these worms. The cases are in the back of the classroom. So Lincoln grabs one of these cases, but he accidentally trips, and this causes the worms to fly out of the case that Lincoln was holding. And the worms happen to fall near a fan that's on right now. So the fan actually blows the worms towards the other students. So the other students are now covered in worms. Lincoln, though, is quick to apologize for this mistake. Lincoln is preparing to apologize, and he's admitting that it was his fault that the worms are all over these other students. But Lynn interrupts Lincoln and drags him to a different part of the classroom to draw attention away from Lincoln. Lincoln doesn't understand why Lynn is doing this, and Lynn says that her next piece of advice is to embrace the never my fault mentality, or to not own up to any mistakes that you make. That's along the lines of what Lynn says anyway. Lincoln, though, doesn't understand why Lynn would give this advice. He points out that it was his fault that the other students ended up covered in worms. Lynn justifies this advice by bringing up another incident from the past. She also makes a point to find Clyde so that Clyde can hear about this incident too. So Lynn tells Lincoln and Clyde about how there was a kid who admitted to farting during a standardized test. And we do see a flashback which shows this kid being laughed at and made fun of by other students. And the kid in this flashback is the same kid from the earlier flashbacks, the kid wearing the gray hoodie that's hiding their face. After the flashback ends, Lincoln and Clyde write this advice down on their respective notepads. Time passes by, and it's now lunchtime. Lynn has brought some meatball subs to the table that Lincoln and Clyde are sitting at right now. And Lynn says that she's glad to see that Lincoln and Clyde are embracing the advice that she's given them. And Lincoln and Clyde do bring up an incident that happened off screen where Clyde utilized the advice that Lynn gave him, Clyde, and Lincoln. So after that, Lincoln inquires what's going to happen after lunchtime, but Lynn explains to Lincoln and Clyde that she just found out that the orientation buddies are supposed to let the fifth graders handle the rest of the school day by themselves. Lynn thinks that Lincoln and Clyde will handle the rest of the school day just fine if they continue to follow her advice. So after Lynn wishes Lynn wishes Lincoln and Clyde the best of luck. They do that thing where they put their hands together. They do a countdown, and then they raise their hands up after the countdown. And after that happens, Lynn comments about Clyde having very soft hands. Clyde thinks it's a compliment, Clyde thinks that Lynn was giving him a compliment, but Lynn responds that she wasn't complimenting Clyde. She thinks that they'll work on that later. Those are the words that Lynn uses, or along those lines anyway. So the scene changes to after lunchtime. So Lincoln and Clyde are going to go about the rest of the school day by themselves. So Lincoln notices that the next class that they're going to, Lincoln notices that the first class they're going to go to after lunch is called The Wonders of Watercolors. But Lincoln and Clyde don't know where the art department is. Lincoln thinks that there wouldn't be any harm if they took just a quick look at the map, but Clyde stops Lincoln because of Lynn's advice that they don't look like newcomers. But they hear a bell that's probably indicating that it's close to the tardy bell, if not the tardy bell itself, and Lincoln and Clyde are beginning to panic that they'll be late. An older classman notices Lincoln and Clyde in despair, and in a rather friendly manner, he inquires if they're lost and need some advice. But Lincoln and Clyde think that this classman isn't sincere because of Lynn saying how some upperclassmen like to pull pranks on newcomers. So Lincoln and Clyde, in a rather antagonistic manner, say that they're not going to fall for any deception that this upperclassman is planning. So Lincoln and Clyde think that they have no choice but to try and just take a guess. So eventually, Lincoln and Clyde do find a door, and there are some drawings on this door. So this leads them to thinking that they might have reached the art department, and they think that maybe this particular door could be the watercolor room. But when Lincoln and Clyde open the door, they find out that this is actually a dark room, and the students in this dark room are not happy about Lincoln and Clyde opening the door. Lincoln and Clyde nervously inquire if this is the Wonders of Watercolors, but one of the students in the classroom, one of the students in this room reveals that this is the fun with photography class. Yes, one of the students reveals that this is the fun with photography class, and when Lincoln and Clyde opened the door, they accidentally ruined a whole month's worth of, the student explains that Lincoln and Clyde ended up ruining a whole month's worth of photos, and the photography girl says that she wants to see Lincoln and Clyde on the blacktop at 3:00 p.m. And then Lincoln and Clyde Lincoln and Clyde seem a bit nervous about this threat. Clyde wonders if maybe this is an invitation for tetherball, but the photography girl clarifies that no, it's not an invitation to tetherball. It's they're going to fight it out on the blacktop. So the photography girl closes the door once again, and Lincoln and Clyde are very nervous about this threat. So a little while later, Lincoln and Clyde try to assure themselves that they can smooth things over with the photography students after school ends, or after the school day ends. So they think that maybe they can maybe they can avoid having other complications throughout the rest of the day. So Lincoln and Clyde do find the next classroom that they're supposed to go to, and they do find some desks that are empty right now, so they proceed to sit at these desks. And they also remember the advice that Lynn gave them about not letting others, they also remember the advice Lynn gave them about making sure that they don't get stuck with poor desks. So Lincoln and Clyde find some desks to sit at, and then a little while later, a boy and a girl approach Lincoln and Clyde. The boy and the girl explain that these desks are their desks, the desks of this boy and this girl. Lincoln and Clyde, though, think that these two students are trying to pull a trick so that Lincoln and Clyde will end up with the worst desks in the classroom. But the girl clarifies that this class does have assigned seats, and those seats are the seats that the boy and the girl were assigned to. But Lincoln and Clyde still don't believe the boy and the girl. They still think that they're trying to pull a trick on them. And then the bell rings, and the boy and the girl become nervous, and they encourage Lincoln and Clyde to hear them out, that they're telling the truth, that these really are assigned seats. But then the teacher notices that the boy and the girl aren't sitting in their assigned seats. He reveals that the boy's name is Byron and the girl's name is Cece. And the teacher says that because he expects all the students to be ready for class when the bell rings, he gives Byron and Cece zeros for participation for the day. Byron and Cece are not happy about this, and they say that they want to meet Lincoln and Clyde on the blacktop at 3:00 p.m. So time passes by, and Lincoln and Clyde have arrived at the gym of Royal Woods Middle School. Lincoln and Clyde are worried about how they ended up angering more students at the middle school, especially because they don't even go to the middle school just yet. Lincoln and Clyde, though, try to calm themselves down by figuring the gym class is the last day, the gym class is the last class for the school day. So they figure as long as they keep a low profile, in their words, then there's no way that they could possibly anger any more students. So the gym teacher and coach of the middle school arrives. The gym teacher explains that they're just going to watch a movie. Yes, the gym teacher and coach of Royal Woods Middle School says that the students are just going to watch a movie for this particular class. And Lincoln and Clyde are glad to hear this. They figure there's no way that they could possibly anger any more students just by watching a movie. But unfortunately for Lincoln and Clyde, they accidentally trip because of the floors being buffed earlier. So Lincoln and Clyde accidentally knock over a shelf full of gym equipment. So the equipment spills all over the gym because of this accident. And the gym teacher doesn't see that Lincoln and Clyde were the ones that accidentally caused this mess. And the gym teacher questions who was responsible for this. But Lincoln and Clyde remember Lynn's advice about not admitting to any mistakes that you make, so they don't say anything. So the gym teacher decides that since no one is going to come forward about this mistake, then no one's going to watch the movie, and they all have to clean up the mess. So, the students aren't happy about this, but Clyde tries to cheer Lincoln up by saying that they could have suffered a terrible fate if they admitted that they were the ones that accidentally caused the mess. But Clyde said this out loud, and some of the students overhear Clyde saying this. So some of the students say that they want to meet Lincoln and Clyde at the blacktop at 3:00 p.m. And Lincoln and Clyde acknowledge that, they're familiar with the routine by now. So they prepare to leave and get ready for this face-off. So time passes by. Pretty much the school day is over, but it's not 3:00 just yet. Lynn is preparing to leave, but then Lynn looks out the window and she sees Lincoln and Clyde heading towards the blacktop, and she sees several angry middle schoolers waiting for them on the blacktop. Lynn quickly rushes out to get to Lincoln and Clyde, and she pulls Lincoln and Clyde towards a hiding spot and inquires them about what happened. Lincoln and Clyde proceed to explain that those students on the blacktop right now are preparing to fight Lincoln and Clyde, and Lincoln and Clyde fear that they're going to lose the fight. Yes, Lincoln and Clyde are pretty confident that they're going to lose the fight against these other middle schoolers. Lynn questions how this happened, what led to this fight happening, and Lincoln and Clyde bring up that they did follow Lynn's advice, but Lynn's advice just led to other students thinking that they were jerks, and Clyde acknowledges that he can't fault these other students for thinking that about himself and Lincoln. And Lincoln sarcastically thanks Lynn for the advice that she gave them. Lynn apologizes to Lincoln and Clyde and says that she genuinely meant well about the advice. She just didn't want Lincoln and Clyde to suffer the fate that she suffered. Lincoln and Clyde, though, are surprised to hear this. They don't know what Lynn is talking about. Lynn then proceeds to reveal that those incidents she mentioned in the past involving that kid, she was the kid. So we do see these flashbacks again through a slightly different perspective. And in these flashbacks, the kid wearing the gray hood is down, so we actually do see the kid's face. And yes, Lynn's face is shown. So Lynn is the very kid that Lynn was talking about. Yes, we do see these flashbacks again with a different perspective, and we do see that, yes, Lynn was the one who endured all of these incidents from the past. Lynn admitted that, Lynn then clarifies for Lincoln and Clyde that this is the truth. She was the very student that she told Lincoln and Clyde about. And Lynn said that eventually she decided that others wouldn't stop messing with her if she acted tough and intimidating. So that's why Lynn says that she eventually came to the conclusion that acting tough would mean that no one would mess with her ever again. And she acknowledged that even though this ended up working for her, it backfired tremendously for Lincoln and Clyde. And Lincoln and Clyde admit that they had no idea that Lynn went through those experiences that she went through when she first started attending Royal Woods Middle School. And Lincoln and Clyde, though, do acknowledge that they do see that Lynn's heart was in the right place. It's just that things didn't end up going well. But they do acknowledge that Lynn meant well and she had her heart in the right place. Lynn, though, then says that she's willing to face off against the middle schoolers. Lynn says she's going to face off against the angry students on Lincoln and Clyde's behalf because her bad advice is what put them in that predicament in the first place. But Lincoln and Clyde think that they should be the ones to face off against the students because they acknowledge that some of these students could still be attending the middle school when Lincoln and Clyde start attending the middle school, and they don't want these students to think that they're weaklings who can't fight their own battles. So Lincoln and Clyde do go to the blacktop, and the other students are glaring at them. It's not 3 o'clock just yet. Lynn is watching from a distance to see how everything unfolds. And eventually, 3 o'clock does roll around. Lincoln and Clyde rush to charge towards the angry middle schoolers, but they end up tripping over themselves. And Lincoln says that he thinks there's no need for the other middle schoolers to beat himself, Lincoln, and Clyde up since they already ended up beating themselves up. The middle schoolers, though, lose their angry looks and they start to laugh about this. Cece speaks on behalf of the other middle schoolers present and admits that they weren't actually planning to fight or beat up Lincoln or Clyde. They just made that threat to make them sweat a little, in her words. Lincoln and Clyde admit that the threat did end up working with regards to making them sweat a little. And we do see that, we do see some sweat stains on Lincoln's shirt right now. And when Lincoln and Clyde were charging earlier, when they tripped over themselves, Clyde's backpack fell off of Clyde's backpack fell off of him. So Byron picks up Clyde's backpack, offering to give it back to Clyde. But the backpack opened up too because of what happened. And Byron can't help but notice that there are cookies within the backpack. Clyde acknowledges that he and Lincoln made the cookies, and he encourages the middle schoolers to have some cookies. And Cece says that the cookies taste really great and inquires Lincoln and Clyde about their names. Lincoln and Clyde do introduce their names, and they do reveal the Lincoln McLeod business cards. The photography girl thinks that the business cards are dorky, but thinks that they're the photography girl thinks that the business cards are dorky, but she says she thinks that they're so dorky that they're actually cool, in the photography girl's words. Byron then notices Lynn nearby and inquires Lynn about if Lincoln is Lynn's brother. Lynn confirms that Lincoln is her brother, and Byron says that Lincoln and Clyde are all right in their book. So Lynn acknowledges, and then Lynn says that Lynn is pleased to hear this, and Lynn agrees with Byron's comments that Lincoln and Clyde are all right. And that is how we end this segment. So this segment is another one of the Season 3 entries that are meant to be spotlight appearances for Lynn. In this case, Lynn wasn't the viewpoint character. Lincoln and Clyde were more the viewpoint characters for this particular segment, but Lynn was one of the spotlight characters. And like I mentioned before, this is one of the Season 3 spotlight appearances for Lynn that are intended to try and alleviate Lynn of the notorious reputation that she gained from some fans. Or, yes, I have brought up before that Lynn is probably the Loud sister with the most notorious of reputations. And, yes, most fans aren't the biggest fans of Lynn's. Some fans aren't really big fans of Lynn because Lynn does have a bit of a track record where she's portrayed being the least sympathetic of the Loud sisters and the most abrasive of the Loud sisters. So Lynn has a bit of a notorious reputation with some fans. The Loud sisters in general do have a bit of a notorious reputation with some fans, but Lynn is probably the Loud sister with the most notorious of reputations. And among the entries where among the Season 3 spotlight appearances for Lynn, though, most fans consider this particular segment to be a segment that was very effective at portraying Lynn in a better light, particularly dealing with the big revelation of this segment. And yes, that big revelation was the backstory for why Lynn has an abrasive attitude, or why Lynn acts rather belligerent. We finally find out that when Lynn first started attending Royal Woods Middle School, she ended up being on the receiving end of being picked on and tormented by some upperclassmen, or tormented, ridiculed, picked on by upperclassmen. So Lynn ended up deciding that the best way for her to deal with people that were messing with her was to put on a tough and aggressive demeanor. But, well, we saw what happened throughout the course of the series. Throughout the course of the series, and in light of this segment, most fans would say, though, that Lynn ended up becoming the very type of person that initially wronged her in the first place. So some consider this to be an example of they who fight monsters sort of situation, or maybe a downplayed version at least. But some fans definitely start to view Lynn in a more sympathetic light after this segment, other fans still don't hold too much sympathy for Lynn, thinking that it still doesn't excuse Lynn's actions. And to be fair, I don't think anyone is saying that Lynn's actions were justified because of this. It's just that we understand Lynn's actions because, like I brought up in the past, there's a big difference between understanding someone's actions and agreeing with someone's actions. Just because you understand why someone might act a certain way doesn't mean you agree with them acting a certain way. But for the most part, I do see that a lot of fans do seem to view Lynn in a better light after this segment. They do hold more sympathy towards Lynn in light of this. Though a little debate I've seen with some fans, though, is that some fans think that Lynn's tougher or abrasive demeanor is more of a figurative mask that she's wearing, while other fans have made the argument that they think Lynn has other fans, though, have argued that they think Lynn has become the mask, so to speak, because some fans have noticed that Lynn's antagonistic behavior isn't just when she's at school. This antagonistic behavior extends to other parts of her life outside of school, including among her own family members. So that's why some fans don't view Lynn in too sympathetic of a light even after this segment, or this is why some fans still don't think of Lynn too sympathetically after this segment, because some fans think it was still in bad form on Lynn's part to still act abrasive towards her own family and outside of school, or that Lynn has this aggressive behavior outside of school. So that didn't exactly, that's why some fans still don't think of Lynn in a very sympathetic light. But otherwise, for the most part, though, some fans do consider this to be at least a step in the right direction, if nothing else. And I would agree. I think this is a step in the right direction. I do think that this segment does help to portray Lynn in a better light. Now, I have mentioned before, I never really hated Lynn's character. I don't have a strong dislike for Lynn's character like some other fans do, but at the same time, I do still think that some fans have a point that Lynn does usually end up being portrayed as the least sympathetic of the Loud sisters, and usually ends up being portrayed as the most belligerent of the Loud sisters. I do think some fans have a point about that. Now, this segment does give us some context about why Lynn acts that way, and like I said, understanding and agreeing with someone's actions aren't the same thing, but this does help to give us a better understanding about why Lynn acts this way. And to give credit, Lynn did honestly have good intentions. She did mean well. She had her heart in the right place. It was just that it backfired tremendously. And I think part of that also is because of context definitely plays a factor. Because yes, like to give some examples, homeroom. Yes, homeroom doesn't have assigned seats according to Lynn, but later classes do have assigned seats. So that's why Lynn's advice was definitely more context, depended more on context. Advice there depended more on context because if you have an assigned seat, you can't really help where you sit at. But for homeroom, yes, although I do agree with Clyde that Lynn's methods were still harsher than what was really called for. Now, another example would be the never my fault mentality situation because, it's not hard to understand why it wouldn't be a good idea to admit that you farted during a standardized test, but if you do make a mistake, like you accidentally spill something or you accidentally make a mess, then you certainly should admit your mistakes. I mean, farting during a standardized test, that's probably an example of something you really should keep to yourself. So again, I would say that boils down to it ultimately boils down to being context sensitive, or it really depends on the context. But I do acknowledge that Lynn's advice was coming from a good place. It was just that it backfired tremendously. And I do think that it was nice of Lynn to actually be willing to admit to the middle schoolers that it was her fault that Lincoln and Clyde ended up acting the way they did. Now, some fans do think it was nice of Lincoln and Clyde to still face off against the middle schoolers themselves because they didn't want to look like weaklings that couldn't fight their own battles. Some fans thought that was brave on Lincoln and Clyde's part, but some fans still think that it was in bad form that Lynn ended up not admitting that it was her fault that Lincoln and Clyde ended up acting the way they did, or that it was Lynn's fault that Lincoln and Clyde ended up on the wrong foot with so many other students. I think what they could have done was, they could have still had Lincoln and Clyde go to the blacktop themselves, but after the situation was all sorted out, they could have included a scene where Lynn admitted that it was her fault that Lincoln and Clyde got off on the wrong foot with them, and I'm sure they could have all hashed it out by then. So I think that would have been my preferred way to do it. You could still have Lincoln and Clyde look like they're willing to fight their own battles for them, but still have Lynn admit that her bad advice is what put them in the predicament that they were in. Now, besides the revelation about Lynn's backstory, this segment also gives us a better look at Royal Woods Middle School. Some fans had noticed in previous entries that Royal Woods Middle School usually seems to be glossed over or overlooked more compared to Royal Woods Elementary School and Royal Woods High School. And part of that might have to do with the fact that Lynn is actually the only Lynn is the only one of the Loud sisters that actually attends Royal Woods Middle School at this point in time. So that probably contributes to why the middle school tends to get overlooked. Margot, one of Lynn's friends, is one of the few named middle schoolers besides Lynn that we got to meet in earlier entries. But this segment does introduce us to some more to some more middle schoolers that actually have names. Byron and Cece immediately come to mind. And maybe some of those other middle schoolers will have their names revealed in later entries. If I'm not mistaken, I believe some of the middle schoolers in this segment do return in a later entry. At least I think some of them do return in the next Season 3 Lynn Spotlight appearance. Now, yes, I'll have to, of course, refresh my memory once I reach that segment's recap and thoughts video, once I rewatch that segment for that segment's recap and thoughts video. But I'm confident that we will get to, I am pretty confident that at least some of those middle schoolers do return in that entry. And I do think that it will be nice to have a better understanding about these characters. I do hope we will get to see more of these middle schoolers. Now, some fans acknowledge, though, that they didn't have a good first impression of these middle schoolers, particularly because of the threat to fight Lincoln and Clyde on the blacktop. Now, some fans were glad to see that they didn't intend to actually follow through with that threat. But even after the revelation that they only did that to make them sweat a little, according to Cece, or to put it in Cece's words, they only did that to make Lincoln and Clyde sweat a little. Even after that revelation, though, some fans still weren't particularly fond of some of those middle schoolers. They still thought that was a little excessive, even if, in fairness, Lincoln and Clyde didn't exactly leave a good impression themselves because of Lynn's advice. So I've seen that debate with some fans, but I think if we do get to see more of them, that can still help in giving us a better understanding of these characters and showing more of these characters in a better light. Similar to how this segment actually gave us a better insight on Lynn's character and portrayed Lynn in a better light compared to certain earlier entries. Now, besides middle school students, we do get to see some of the middle school staff members. For the most part, most of their names weren't really revealed in the segment themselves, but the credits do reveal their names, and maybe, I think maybe a later entry does reveal at least some of their names. I'll have to refresh my memory when I rewatch later entries of Season 3 for those entries' recap and thoughts videos, but at the very least, we do find out that the middle school's principal is Principal Ramirez, but we don't get to see Principal Ramirez, and we don't learn Principal Ramirez's first name, so we don't know Principal Ramirez's first name, and we don't know Principal Ramirez's gender either. So I do suspect, though, that if we do get more entries focused on the middle school, then maybe we will get to see Principal Ramirez in person and get to learn more about these other staff members. And, I should also mention this. This segment could also be considered an example of hilarious in hindsight, because this segment actually ends up tying into something that's going to happen later on in the series. I guess I should go ahead and mention this, but as of the recording of this video, there was some news a little while ago that revealed that the 5th season of The Loud House is actually going to show the characters becoming an age older than they are right now. So, according to this news information, Lincoln and his inner circle are going to go to Royal Woods Middle School starting in 5th grade. So this segment showing Lincoln and Clyde having a tour of the middle school ended up foreshadowing what the 5th season is going to be like, with Lincoln, Clyde, the rest of their inner circle, and their fellow classmates going to middle school. Now, whether that was intentional or just a coincidence, I'm not sure how far along they planned ahead. Especially because I don't think the show was greenlit for a 5th season at the time. But whether they planned it out just in case or not, I'm not sure. Or I don't know if that was just a coincidence. But it does end up working as foreshadowing, whether intentional or coincidence. But yeah, so that does give us a chance. Or yes, I imagine that the 5th season might be the season where we get to see more of the staff members of Royal Woods Middle School. There's still a chance that maybe the 4th season could still also give us some insight if we do have some more Lynn Spotlight appearances during Season 4. So yes, I think there is a chance that we might get to see more of these. I think we might get more entries dedicated to Royal Woods Middle School, at least in the 5th season, maybe even in the 4th season, depending on the spotlight appearances Lynn will receive in the 4th season. And I guess, yeah, by the fifth season, we'll also see, I think in the fifth season, we still also might get to see more of these middle school students here, depending on whether or not they are eighth graders at this point in time or not. But I guess we'll have to see how season 4 and season 5 unfold. Now, besides that, yes, I guess the other big thing to talk about is, we've already brought up how this segment helped to present Lynn in a better light compared to earlier entries. And this has led to some fans hoping that we will get to see similar segments that do give us the backstory of some other characters. Yes, some fans did appreciate this segment for showing us Lynn's backstory and giving us a better understanding about why Lynn acts the way she does. So some fans are hoping that this will be the case for other characters too. Off the top of my head, I know some fans want to see some backstory for Luann in particular because most fans do want to know why Luann acts like a sadist during April Fool's Day, why Luann acts rather antagonistic during the prank apocalypse, or why does Luann create a prank apocalypse during April Fool's Day. Some fans definitely want to see some backstory about Luann because of the prank apocalypse. Yes, some fans want to learn more about Luann's backstory in particular because of how she acts during April Fool's Day. And another character, at least speaking for myself, and I'm sure there are other viewers that will agree with me, but I think it would be a nice idea to see a segment or an episode or an entry of some kind dedicated to Ronnie Ann's backstory, whether that be in any of the later seasons of The Loud House or in the spin-off series, The Casa Grandes. I think it would be a good idea to have more insight on Ronnie Ann's character in particular. And that's especially because there are some fans out there that still hold a grudge against Ronnie Ann because of her initial behavior. I do think that even if Ronnie Ann's initial behavior wasn't the right thing to do, I still think at least having an understanding of why that initial behavior came about would provide some insight for Ronnie Ann's character. And I think maybe some fans will finally let go of their grudge towards Ronnie Ann. Some fans were willing to let go of their grudge towards Lynn in this segment, and since I would argue that Lynn is more abrasive and much more belligerent than Ronnie Ann was on her worst days, I do think that would be a good idea for Ronnie Ann to have that sort of backstory entry too. If Lynn, the Loud sister with the most notorious of reputations among the Loud sisters, was able to be less hated by some fans because of this segment. I think if this segment, considering how this segment managed to portray Lynn in a better light, in light of her notorious reputation, considering how some fans were willing to let go of their grudge towards Lynn because of this entry, I'm hoping that a spotlight appearance for Ronnie Ann about her backstory might help in having some fans let go of their grudge towards Ronnie Ann too, especially because, like I would argue that Ronnie Ann is less abrasive and when compared to Lynn. So if Lynn managed to, if some fans are willing to let go of their grudge towards Lynn, I think it would be a good idea for a spotlight appearance that can help some fans let go of their grudge towards Ronnie Ann. And yeah, I think a spotlight appearance for Luann's backstory and maybe some of the other Loud sisters too, like maybe Lola or Lori or maybe Lisa. Like I think spot backstories for the other Loud sisters or other characters like Ronnie Ann would be a good idea too, considering how this segment helps to provide a better understanding of Lynn's character, especially in light of Lynn's notorious reputation with some fans. So otherwise, I would say that's it for this segment. I found it interesting how this segment ended up foreshadowing what's going to happen in the 5th season, even though it's possible it might have just been a coincidence, it might not have been intentional, but it still ended up foreshadowing what's going to happen in the 5th season. I did appreciate seeing more insight about Royal Woods Middle School because the middle school seems to have less attention when compared to Royal Woods Elementary School and Royal Woods High School. And I did like seeing some more named middle school characters, and I do hope that we can receive a better understanding of them in later entries of the series. And I did like meeting some of the staff members of Royal Woods Middle School. I hope we will get to see more of them in the future, have a better understanding of what they're like in the future too. And like I said, this segment in particular, I think did a very good job at portraying Lynn in a much more sympathetic light. Lynn's intentions throughout the segment were shown to be well-meaning and good-hearted. It was just more that Lynn ended up being an unwilling instigator of doom, albeit a very downplayed example. And yes, I do think that this segment also did well at giving us a better insight on Lynn's character, or we have a better understanding of why Lynn acts the way she does. And like I said, I think this segment providing us some backstory about Lynn's character opens up the idea for other characters like other Loud sisters or Ronnie Ann to have similar backstory entries to give us a better understanding about why they might act the way they do about certain situations. So yeah, I think that there's potential to explore that for other characters, and that might help with giving other characters a better understanding, or that might help give us a better understanding of other characters, especially characters that might have notorious reputations too, like how Lynn has a notorious reputation with some fans. But otherwise, I would say that's it for this particular segment. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment for episode 71 of The Loud House on this channel. Take care, and until next time,